The Texas heat pressed down like a blacksmith's hammer against an anvil, relentless and absolute. The summer sun had transformed the landscape into something biblical, a testament to endurance where only the stubborn and the desperate dared to tread. I had been riding for 3 days straight, following a lead on a herd of mustangs spotted near the canyon lands. My profession as a horse trader kept me moving through territories where most men feared to venture, but it also kept my pockets lined with enough silver to survive another season. The wind carried no relief, only dust that clung to my skin like a second layer of clothing. My horse, a sturdy roan mare I had named Copper for the russet sheen of her coat, plodded forward with the steady determination of an animal that understood the desert's cruel mathematics. We were still 2 hours from the creek I had marked on my mental map when I saw something that made me pull hard on the reins. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a dark shape against the pale sand, perhaps a fallen mesquite branch or an abandoned piece of traveling gear. But then the shape moved, just barely, a tremor of life in a place that swallowed the living whole. I urged Copper forward, my hand instinctively moving to the rifle secured to my saddle. In this territory, caution was not merely wise, it was essential for survival. As we drew closer, the shape resolved itself into the figure of a woman. She lay crumpled on her side, her body twisted in a way that spoke of complete exhaustion. Her clothing, what remained of it, was torn and stained with dirt and what looked like dried blood. Dark hair spread around her head like a fan, tangled with burrs and sand. She was Apache, I could tell from the distinctive beadwork on what remained of her moccasins and the traditional pattern woven into the belt that still clung to her waist. I dismounted quickly, approaching with measured steps. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale seeming to cost her tremendous effort. When I knelt beside her, her eyes fluttered open, dark as midnight and filled with a mixture of terror and defiance. Even in her weakened state, there was a fierce pride in that gaze, a warning that she would fight if she had to, despite having nothing left to fight with. "Easy now," I said softly, keeping my hands visible. "I'm not here to harm you." She did not respond, perhaps did not understand my words, but her eyes tracked my movements with the wariness of a wild animal caught in a trap. I reached for my canteen, uncorking it slowly, and brought it to her lips. At first she turned her head away, suspicion overriding even the desperate thirst that must have been consuming her. But then the scent of water reached her, and something in her resolve cracked. She drank with the desperation of someone who had gone far too long without. Water spilled down her chin and neck, but she did not care. When she had drunk her fill, she fell back against the sand, her chest heaving with the effort. I took the opportunity to examine her more carefully. She bore marks of violence, bruises darkening her arms, a gash along her temple that had scabbed over but still looked angry and infected. Her feet were torn and bleeding, wrapped inadequately in strips of cloth that had long since failed their purpose. "Can you ride?" I asked, though I suspected she understood little of my language. I gestured to Copper, then to her, trying to communicate my intention. She watched me for a long moment, and I could see the calculations happening behind those dark eyes. Trust was clearly not something she granted easily, and given her condition, I could not fault her caution. But the desert offered no alternatives, and we both knew it. Finally, she nodded, a slight movement of her head that carried the weight of surrender. Getting her onto Copper proved difficult. She had no strength left in her limbs, and I had to lift her bodily, feeling how light she had become, how close to death she must have been. I settled her in front of me, her back against my chest, and she did not resist. Her head lolled against my shoulder as I turned Copper south, away from the open desert and toward the relative safety of the creek. The ride took longer than I expected. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, and several times I had to adjust my hold on her to keep her from sliding off. Copper, bless her steady heart, maintained her pace without complaint, as though she understood the urgency of our mission. The sun continued its merciless arc across the sky, and I found myself rationing the remaining water in my canteen, giving her small sips whenever she stirred. By the time we reached the creek, the shadows had begun to stretch long across the land. The water ran clear and cool here, fed by a spring that bubbled up from deep beneath the earth. I dismounted carefully, then lifted the woman down, carrying her to the shade of a cluster of cottonwood trees that grew along the bank. She was barely conscious now, her skin burning with fever. I soaked my bandana in the creek and pressed it to her forehead, then her neck, trying to bring down the heat that radiated from her body. She stirred at the touch of cool water, her eyes opening briefly to fix on my face. There was a question in that gaze, unspoken but clear: "Why are you helping me?" I had no answer that would make sense, even if we had shared a common language. Perhaps it was simply that I could not leave another human being to die in the desert, regardless of who they were or where they came from. Perhaps it was something deeper, a recognition of shared suffering in a land that showed mercy to no one. Whatever the reason, I knew I was committed now to seeing her through this crisis. I made camp as the sun set, building a small fire and setting about the task of tending to her wounds properly. I had some medical supplies in my saddlebag, basic things: bandages, a tin of salve, a small bottle of whiskey that served as both medicine and disinfectant. I cleaned the gash on her temple first, noting how she flinched at the sting of alcohol but made no sound. Her stoicism impressed me. This was a woman who had endured much and learned to bear pain in silence. Her feet required the most attention. The soles were lacerated and deeply bruised, testament to how far she had traveled without adequate protection. I cleaned them carefully, applied the salve, and wrapped them in clean bandages. As I worked, she watched me with an intensity that was almost unnerving, as though she was memorizing every detail of my face and actions. When I finished, I offered her more water and some dried meat from my provisions. She ate slowly, mechanically, her body going through the motions while her mind seemed elsewhere. I did not press her with questions. Whatever had happened to her, whatever she had fled from, she would tell me in her own time if she chose to tell me at all. That night I kept the fire burning and slept in fits, waking frequently to check on her. The fever broke sometime before dawn, and when the sun rose again, I found her sitting up, her dark eyes clear and focused. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, and I saw something shift in her expression. The wariness remained, but it was tempered now by something else, perhaps the first glimmer of trust. Over the next several days, we remained camped by the creek. I had no pressing business that could not wait, and she clearly needed time to recover. I spent my days hunting small game and foraging for edible plants, maintaining our camp and tending to copper. She spent hers regaining her strength, moving slowly at first, testing her body's limits and gradually pushing past them. We communicated in gestures and expressions, building a vocabulary of shared understanding. She showed me which plants were safe to eat and which to avoid. I showed her how to set snares for rabbits and how to read the signs that indicated water nearby. It was a practical education, born of necessity, but it created a bond between us that went beyond words. On the fourth day, she spoke to me in English for the first time. The words were halting and heavily accented, but clear enough to understand. Men come. Hunt me. They kill my family. The simple declaration carried such weight that I felt it settle in my chest like a stone. I did not ask for details, did not need to. I had seen enough of the violence that plagued these territories to understand what she meant. The conflicts between settlers and the Apache people had grown increasingly brutal, with atrocities committed on both sides. She had been caught in the middle of it, had lost everything, and had barely escaped with her life. "You're safe now," I told her, though I knew the words were inadequate. Safety was a relative concept in this land, temporary at best. She nodded slowly, but her eyes remained haunted. "They kill my husband. My son. My daughter escape, but I not know where." The revelation struck me hard. She was not merely a survivor, she was a mother who had lost her child in the chaos of violence. The desperation that had driven her into the desert made sense now. She had not been running away, she had been searching, even as her body failed her. "Your daughter," I said carefully. "How old?" She held up both hands, showing me her fingers. 16 years old, then. Old enough to survive on her own if she had her mother's strength, but young enough to be vulnerable in countless ways. An idea began to form in my mind, born partly of compassion and partly of pragmatism. I had connections throughout the territory, other traders and scouts who moved freely between settlements. If her daughter had survived, if she was still in the area, perhaps I could help find her. I can ask around, I offered. I know people. If your daughter is alive, maybe we can find her. The hope that flared in her eyes was almost painful to witness. She reached out and grasped my hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite her ordeal. You do this? I can try, I said, not wanting to promise more than I could deliver. But we need to get you somewhere safer first. Somewhere you can rest properly. She nodded, understanding the logic even if it meant delaying the search for her daughter. You have home? I thought of my small ranch, a day's ride west of here. It was not much, just a cabin and a corral, but it was mine, carved out of this harsh land through sweat and determination. Yes. It's not fancy, but it's secure. I go with you, she said, and there was no question in her voice. It was a statement of fact, a decision made. We set out the next morning, Copper carrying us both once again, though this time the woman sat upright, her arms wrapped loosely around my waist for balance. She was still weak, but the rest and food had restored some of her vitality. As we rode, she told me more of her story in fragmented English, painting a picture of a life that had been torn apart by forces beyond her control. Her name was Nail, which she told me meant flower in her language. She had lived with her family in a small camp in the mountains, trying to maintain the old ways while the world around them changed with brutal swiftness. Her husband had been a skilled hunter, respected among their people. Her son had been learning to follow in his father's footsteps. Her daughter, Kaya, had been promised to a young warrior from another band, a union that would have strengthened alliances. But then the soldiers had come, acting on reports of raids that had nothing to do with Nail's peaceful band. They had attacked without warning, without mercy. In the chaos, Nail had seen her husband and son cut down. She had screamed for Kaya to run, had watched her daughter disappear into the trees. Then Nail herself had fled, pursued by men who seemed intent on leaving no survivors. She had run for days, hiding during daylight, moving at night, until exhaustion and injury had finally brought her down in the place where I had found her. She had been preparing to die when I appeared, had already made her peace with joining her husband and son in the spirit world. "But you save me," she said quietly as we rode. "Why you do this?" It was the same question I had asked myself, and I still had no simple answer. "Because I could," I said finally. "Because leaving you there would have been wrong." She was silent for a long time after that, and I thought perhaps the conversation was over. But then she spoke again, her voice carrying a different tone, something almost reverent. "My people believe all things connect. You saved my life. Now my life belonged to you. This is debt I must repay." I felt uncomfortable with the notion. "You don't owe me anything. Any decent person would have done the same." "Not true," she said firmly. "Many men pass woman in desert. Many men see Apache woman and ride faster, not stop. You different. This matter." I did not argue further. I was beginning to understand that her sense of honor and obligation ran deep, shaped by traditions I could not fully comprehend. If she felt indebted to me, then perhaps the kindest thing I could do was accept that with grace rather than dismissing it. My ranch came into view as the sun reached its zenith on the second day of travel. It was not an impressive sight, just a weathered cabin with a chimney, a small barn, and a corral where I kept the horses I was training for sale. But it was solid and defensible, positioned with its back to a rocky outcrop that provided natural protection. I had chosen the location carefully when I first settled here, understanding that in this territory, strategic thinking could mean the difference between life and death. I helped nail down from copper and led her inside the cabin. It was sparse, furnished with only the essentials: a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a stove for cooking, and shelves that held my supplies. But it was clean and cool, a refuge from the brutal heat outside. "You rest here," I told her, gesturing to the bed. "Take as much time as you need to recover." She looked around the cabin, taking in every detail, then turned back to me. "And you? Where you sleep?" "I'll make do," I said, not wanting to displace her from the only real bed. "I've slept on worse than a bedroll on the floor." She frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the arrangement, but was too exhausted to argue. She settled onto the bed with a small sigh, her body finally relaxing now that we had reached relative safety. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing deep and even. I spent the rest of the day tending to necessary tasks, feeding and watering Copper and the other horses, checking the integrity of the corral fence, taking inventory of my supplies. The routine work felt grounding after the intensity of the past several days. As I worked, I found my mind returning again and again to Nail's lost daughter. If the girl was alive, she would be frightened, alone, possibly injured. Every day that passed decreased the likelihood of finding her. That evening, as I prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Nail emerged from the cabin. She moved stiffly, still healing, but there was determination in her posture. She watched me cook for a moment, then stepped forward and gently but firmly took the wooden spoon from my hand. "I cook," she said. "You do much." "I do this." I started to protest, but the look in her eyes stopped me. This was important to her, a way of reclaiming some agency after being helpless for so long. I stepped back and let her take over, watching as she examined the ingredients and adjusted the seasoning with practiced efficiency. Whatever else she had been in her former life, she had clearly been responsible for feeding her family. The meal she produced was simple but significantly better than what I would have made. She had added some wild herbs I had not even noticed growing near the cabin, transforming basic ingredients into something that actually had flavor. We ate together at the small table, the silence between us comfortable now, familiar. After dinner, I began to formulate a plan. "Tomorrow," I said, "I'll ride to the nearest trading post. The man who runs it, Tom Bridger, knows everyone who passes through this region. If your daughter has been seen, he'll know about it." Nail's eyes brightened with hope, but there was also fear there. What if she's not alive? It was a possibility we both had to face. "Then at least you'll know," I said gently. "Not knowing is its own kind of torture." She nodded slowly, accepting the harsh logic. "I go with you." "You're not strong enough yet," I objected. "The ride would set back your recovery." "I am mother," she said simply, and in those 3 words was an iron will that I knew better than to challenge. A mother's determination to find her child transcended physical weakness. I recognized that arguing would be pointless. "We leave at dawn," I conceded. That night, I made myself a bedroll on the floor as promised, giving Nail the bed. But sleep eluded me, my mind turning over the challenges ahead. Finding one young Apache woman in the vast expanse of the Texas territories would be like searching for a specific grain of sand on a beach. But I had given my word, and I would do everything in my power to honor it. I woke before sunrise to find Nail already up, preparing breakfast with quiet efficiency. She had raided my stores and created something that resembled the cornmeal cakes I had seen Apache women making at the trading posts, cooked on a flat stone heated over the fire. They were surprisingly good, and I found myself eating with genuine appetite. "You're a fine cook," I told her, and she acknowledged the compliment with a slight nod, but her mind was clearly elsewhere, focused on what the day might bring. We set out as the first light touched the eastern horizon, both of us mounted now. I had saddled Copper for Nail and taken one of the Mustangs I had been training for myself. The young gelding was spirited but steady, and he settled into the journey with minimal fuss. The trading post was 4 hours' ride to the north, positioned at a crossroads where multiple trails converged. Tom Bridger had established it 5 years ago and had built it into a thriving enterprise through a combination of fair dealing and strategic neutrality. He traded with everyone: settlers, Mexicans, Apache, Comanche, even the occasional outlaw passing through. His policy was simple: no violence at the post, and everyone's business was their own. We arrived to find the usual assortment of travelers and locals. A supply wagon was being loaded, its driver arguing good-naturedly with Tom about the quality of flour. A pair of Apache men stood near the corral, examining the horses Tom had available for trade. They looked up as we approached, their eyes narrowing as they recognized Nail despite her bedraggled appearance. One of them said something in their language, his tone sharp with surprise or concern. Nail responded quickly, gesturing toward me, and I caught the word for friend or ally in her explanation. The men's postures relaxed slightly, though they continued to watch me with cautious eyes. Tom Bridger emerged from the post, a barrel-chested man with a graying beard and eyes that missed nothing. He took in the scene with a glance, his gaze lingering on Nail's still visible injuries and the way she carried herself with exhausted determination. "Samuel," he greeted me, using my given name. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Who's your companion?" I dismounted and approached him, keeping my voice low. "Her name is Nail. She's looking for her daughter. Apache girl, 16 years old, might have passed through here in the last week or two. She would have been alone, possibly injured or frightened." Tom's expression grew serious. He had children of his own, daughters among them, and I knew he would understand the urgency. "Let me think. We've had a fair number of people through, but a young Apache woman traveling alone, that would stand out." He called over to the 2 Apache men, speaking in their language with a fluency that never failed to impress me. They conferred for several minutes, Nail joining the conversation with increasing animation. I stood back, unable to follow the rapid exchange but reading the body language carefully. Hope, disappointment, then something else, a new possibility opening up. Finally, Tom turned back to me. "One of these men says his band took in a young woman about 10 days ago. She was in bad shape, dehydrated and traumatized, but she's alive. They're camped about 20 miles west of here, in the canyon country." The relief that washed over Nail's face was profound, transforming her features. She gripped my arm, her fingers digging in with desperate strength. "Kaya? My Kaya?" Tom spoke to the Apache men again, then nodded to Nail. "They believe so. The girl spoke of her mother, how they were separated during an attack. They've been caring for her, hoping to find her family." Tears streamed down Nail's face, the first I had seen her shed. She turned to me, and before I could react, she embraced me with fierce gratitude, her body shaking with silent sobs. I stood awkwardly for a moment, then gently patted her back, understanding that this was a release of tension that had been building for weeks. The Apache men agreed to guide us to their camp, recognizing that Nail was too weak to make the journey alone and that my presence as someone known to Tom would serve as a guarantee of peaceful intent. We set out immediately, not wanting to waste another moment. The ride was long and difficult, taking us through rough terrain where the horses had to pick their way carefully between rocks and through narrow canyons. Nail rode with renewed strength, her entire being focused on the reunion that awaited. I could see the transformation in her posture, the way she sat straighter in the saddle, the way her eyes scanned ahead eagerly for the first sight of the camp. Whatever pain she had been carrying, whatever exhaustion had weighed her down, it seemed to lift in the face of this hope. The Apache camp was well hidden, tucked into a canyon where a spring provided reliable water. As we approached, people emerged from their dwellings, watching our arrival with interest and caution. Then a figure broke from the group, a young woman with long dark hair who had been helping with some task. She stopped, staring at Nail in disbelief. "Shima?" The word, meaning mother, was barely a whisper at first. Then louder, "Shima." Nail all but fell from her horse in her haste to dismount. Mother and daughter ran to each other, colliding in an embrace that spoke of joy and grief and relief all tangled together. They sank to their knees, clinging to each other, both crying openly now. The others in the camp watched with smiles, clearly moved by the reunion. I remained mounted, feeling like an intruder on this intensely private moment. But Nail, even in the midst of her joy, did not forget me. She pulled back from her daughter, wiping tears from both their faces, and spoke rapidly, gesturing toward me. Kaya looked at me then, and I was struck by how much she resembled her mother, the same fierce spirit evident in her dark eyes, the same proud bearing despite what she had endured. They approached together, Nail keeping one arm around her daughter as though afraid she might disappear. "This man saved my life," Nail said to Kaya in English, clearly wanting me to understand. "Find me in desert dying. Bring me his home. Help me find you. We owe him everything." Kaya studied me for a long moment, taking my measure. Then she placed her hand over her heart and bowed her head in the Apache gesture of respect and gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her English more polished than her mother's. "You have given my mother back to me. This is a debt that can never be fully repaid." I felt uncomfortable with the weight of their gratitude. "I'm just glad you're both safe," I said. "No debt is owed." But I could see from their expressions that they disagreed. In their culture, such a debt was not something to be dismissed lightly. It created bonds and obligations that ran deep, connecting lives in ways that I was only beginning to understand. The band welcomed us to stay the night, and their hospitality was generous despite their limited resources. We were fed and given a place near the fire, and I listened as Nail and Kaya spoke late into the night, filling in the gaps in each other's stories, mourning their losses together, and celebrating their reunion. As I lay in my bedroll that night, staring up at the stars visible through the canyon opening, I felt a strange sense of completion. I had set out days ago simply to trade horses, following my usual routine. I had not expected to find a dying woman in the desert, had not anticipated becoming part of a story larger than myself. Yet here I was, woven into the fabric of these women's lives by accident and choice in equal measure. The next morning, Nail approached me as I was saddling Copper for the return journey. Kaya stood beside her, and there was something formal in their demeanor that put me on alert. "Samuel," Nail began, using my name for the first time. "You have given me back my life and my daughter. In my culture, such a debt creates sacred obligation. I must repay you with something of equal value." "You don't," I started, but she held up her hand, forestalling my protest. "Please. Listen." She took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "I am widow now. I have no husband to provide for me, no son to hunt. My daughter, she is strong, but she is young. She need protection, need husband to build future with. In these times, Apache woman alone is not safe. You understand this?" I nodded slowly, beginning to see where this was leading and feeling a twist of anxiety in my gut. "You are good man," Nail continued. "You show this when you save me, when you help me find Kaya. You have honor. You have home, can provide. And you need wife, I think. I see your cabin. No woman there, no family. Man alone is also not complete." Kaya was blushing now, her eyes downcast, but she did not contradict her mother's words. "I offer you my daughter," Nail said formally. "If you take her as wife, both our families become stronger. You gain woman who can work, who can bear children, who can stand beside you. She gain protection, home, future. And I know my daughter will be safe, will be with man of honor." The proposition stunned me into silence. I had rescued a dying woman from the desert, and now I was being offered her daughter in marriage. The logic made sense from their perspective, I could see that. It was practical and strategic, a way of transforming tragedy into opportunity, of building new connections to replace the ones that had been severed. But from my perspective, it felt overwhelming, life-changing in ways I had not prepared for. I looked at Kaya, really looked at her for the first time. She was beautiful in the way that wild things are beautiful, unself-conscious and natural. Her face bore the marks of her ordeal, but also a strength that suggested she would not break easily. She met my eyes briefly, and I saw in that glance both nervousness and curiosity. She was not being forced into this, I realized. She had some agency in the decision, had likely discussed it with her mother and agreed. "I need time to think," I said carefully, not wanting to offend but also not wanting to make a hasty decision. It's a lot to consider." Neil nodded, seeming to approve of my caution. "Good. Think careful. This is not small thing. But I tell you true, you will not find better wife than my Kaya. She is skilled, she is strong, she is loyal. She will honor you and your home." "And if I say no?" I asked, needing to know what would happen if I declined. "Then we still owe you debt," Neil said simply. "And we find another way to repay. But I hope you say yes." "I see how you are, Samuel. You are man who helps others, who does what is right even when it is hard. This is same. You help us again, and we help you. Both sides benefit." I promised to give them an answer before I left, and I spent the rest of the morning wrestling with the decision. Marriage had never been in my plans. My life as a horse trader required mobility and freedom, and I had always assumed that domesticity would come later, if at all. But as I thought about it, I realized how isolated I had become. My cabin was indeed lonely, my life defined more by absence than presence. What Neil was offering was not just a wife, but connection, family, a reason to build something lasting instead of just surviving day to day. And Kaya herself was not unappealing. She was young, yes, but in this land people matured quickly or did not survive. At 16, she had already experienced loss and hardship that would have broken many adults. She had proven her resilience. And there was something in the way she moved, the way she carried herself, that spoke to an inner strength I found myself respecting. By midday, I had made my decision, perhaps foolishly, perhaps wisely. I would never know for certain until I lived it. I found Neil and Kaya near the spring, washing clothes. They looked up as I approached, and I could see the tension in their postures, the hope they were trying to keep contained. "I'll accept," I said simply. "But I want to be clear about something. I'm not buying her or claiming her as property. If we do this, it's as equals. She'll be my partner, not my servant." Relief and joy spread across Neil's face. She spoke rapidly to Kaya in their language, and the girl's eyes widened. She looked at me with an expression I could not quite read, a mixture of nervousness and something that might have been cautious optimism. "When?" Neil asked. "When you marry?" "That's up to Kaya," I said, addressing the girl directly. "I know this is all happening fast. If she needs time, if she wants to wait until she's more certain, I understand." Kaya spoke for the first time, her voice soft but clear. "My mother is right. Apache woman alone is not safe now. And I see you are good man. You could have left my mother in desert, but you did not. You could have taken from her, but you did not. You show respect. I will marry you, if you want me." The directness of her statement caught me off guard, but I appreciated it. No games, no false modesty, just honest assessment of the situation and a willingness to move forward. "Then we'll marry," I agreed. "But we'll do it right, with proper ceremony, respecting both our traditions." The band's leader, an older man named Cochino, agreed to perform the ceremony according to Apache customs. It was simpler than I had expected, focused on the practical joining of two people rather than elaborate ritual. We stood before the assembled band, with Neil and Cochino serving as witnesses. There were words spoken in Apache that I did not understand but that seemed to bind us together in the eyes of her people. Then Cochino asked me to speak my commitment. "I take Kaya as my wife," I said clearly, looking at her as I spoke. I promised to provide for her, to protect her, to treat her with respect and honor. I promised to be faithful and to build a life with her that is worthy of the trust her mother has placed in me. Kaya responded with her own vow, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what we were doing. I take Samuel as my husband. I promise to stand beside him, to work alongside him, to be loyal and true. I promise to honor his home and to build a future with him. It was done. We were married. The simplicity and speed of it felt surreal, as though I had stepped outside my own life and was watching someone else make these monumental decisions. But there was no going back now, and as I looked at Kaya, at the vulnerable hope in her eyes, I found I did not want to go back. The band celebrated with us that evening, sharing what food they had and singing songs I did not understand but could appreciate for the joy they contained. Nail embraced both of us, tears streaming down her face, clearly overwhelmed with relief and happiness. Her daughter was safe, provided for, and Nail herself had fulfilled the obligation she felt toward me in the most meaningful way she could conceive. As the celebration wound down and people began to drift off to their dwellings, Kaya and I found ourselves alone by the dying fire. The awkwardness between us was palpable. We were married, but we were strangers. I had no idea how to bridge that gap. "You don't have to be afraid," I said finally. "I meant what I said about being equals. I won't force anything you're not ready for." She studied me in the firelight, her expression thoughtful. "I am not afraid," she said. "I am uncertain. This is new path, different from what I expected for my life. But I believe it is good path. You are good man, Samuel. My mother is right about this." "I hope so," I said honestly. "I'm not perfect. I can be stubborn, and I spend a lot of time alone, so I'm probably not great at sharing space. But I'll do my best by you, Kaya. That I can promise." She smiled then, a small but genuine expression that softened her features. "That is all anyone can promise. We will learn together." We spent the night in the camp, though not together, both of us needing more time before that final intimacy. In the morning, we prepared to leave, taking our farewells from the band and from Nail, who would remain with her people for now. Nail embraced her daughter long and hard, whispering things in their language that I could not understand but that made Kaya nod seriously. Then she turned to me and placed her hands on my shoulders, her dark eyes intense. "You have my daughter now," she said. "This is most precious thing I can give. You understand this?" "I do," I assured her. "I'll take care of her, Nail. You have my word." "I know you will. This is why I give her to you." She paused, then added, "You saved my life that day in desert. Now you save her life too, in different way. You give her future when everything else was taken. This is debt repaid, but it is also beginning of new bond between us. You are my son now, Samuel. My family is your family." The weight of those words settled over me as Kaya and I began the journey back to my ranch. We rode side by side, the silence between us filled with unspoken questions and adjustments. I watched her from the corner of my eye, noting how naturally she sat in the saddle, how her gaze constantly scanned the horizon with the wariness of someone who had learned that danger could come from any direction. The journey took 2 days, and we camped overnight in a protected hollow where a small creek provided water. I set up our camp with practiced efficiency while Kaya gathered firewood and edible plants she recognized. We worked in tandem without needing to coordinate, each understanding what needed to be done and doing it. There was a competence to her movements that I appreciated, a self-sufficiency that suggested she would not be a burden but a true partner. That night, as we sat by the fire eating the simple meal we had prepared together, she asked me about my life, about how I had come to be a horse trader in this isolated country. I told her about growing up in Missouri, about how my father had been a farmer who broke horses on the side, and how I had inherited his skill with animals but not his love of farming. I told her about drifting west after my parents died, looking for something I could not name, and finding a kind of peace in the vast emptiness of the territories. "You are like me," she said when I finished. "Looking for place to belong after losing everything." The observation was accurate and unexpectedly perceptive. "I suppose I am," I admitted. "I hadn't thought of it that way, but yes. Maybe that's why I stopped when I saw your mother." I recognized something of myself in her situation. "The spirits guide us to where we need to be," Kaya said. "My people believe this. You were meant to find my mother. We were meant to meet. This is how the world works, even when we cannot see the pattern." I was not sure I believed in such predetermined paths, but I could not deny the strange chain of coincidences that had led us to this moment. If I had taken a different route, if I had been an hour earlier or later, if I had not stopped to investigate what I thought might be a mirage, none of this would have happened. Nail would have died in the desert, Kaya would have lost her mother, and I would still be living alone in my cabin, unaware of what I was missing. We reached the ranch as the sun began its descent on the second day. Kaya dismounted and stood for a long moment, surveying what would now be her home. I tried to see it through her eyes, the weathered cabin, the simple corral, the endless expanse of scrubland stretching in every direction. It was not much compared to what she had lost, not much compared to the life she might have had. "It's not grand," I said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "But it's solid. And there's room to expand if we need to." She turned to me with that serious expression I was coming to recognize. "My people lived in wickiups made of branches and hide. Before attack, I had cooking pot, 2 blankets, and clothes I wore. This," she gestured at the cabin, "this is more than I have had in long time. Is good home, Samuel." Her words eased something in me I had not realized was tense. I showed her around the property, explaining how I managed the water supply, where I kept the feed for the horses, how I had arranged the cabin for efficiency. She absorbed everything with focused attention, asking practical questions about the routine and how she could contribute. Inside the cabin, she moved slowly through the space, touching things gently: the table I had built myself, the simple curtain that served as a room divider, the shelves where I kept my few books and supplies. When she reached the bed, she paused, and I saw color rise in her cheeks. "I can sleep on the floor," I said quickly. "Like I did when your mother was here. Until you're comfortable until you're ready for things to change." She turned to face me, and there was something in her eyes I had not seen before, a quiet resolve. "No. We are married now. This is your bed, and I am your wife. We share bed. This is how it should be. Kaya, there's no rush. We barely know each other." "This is true," she acknowledged. "But time will not change what must happen. We are married. We must build life together. Waiting will only make it more difficult, more strange. Better to begin as we will continue." Her logic was sound, even if it made my heart race with nervousness. She was right that prolonging the awkwardness would only make it worse. And there was a courage in her willingness to move forward that I found myself admiring. She had already lost so much, had already had her life torn apart. She was choosing not to let fear dictate her future. That night was difficult in ways I had not anticipated. The intimacy of sharing space with another person, of adjusting to someone else's rhythms and habits, required a vulnerability I had not practiced in years. But Kaya moved through it with a quiet grace, neither demanding nor retreating, simply being present. And gradually, the strangeness began to ease, replaced by something more natural, more right. In the days and weeks that followed, we fell into a routine that worked for both of us. I continued my work with the horses, training the wild ones I caught and preparing them for sale. Kaya took over the domestic work, but not in a way that made her seem subservient. She approached it as her contribution to our shared enterprise, with the same competence and efficiency she brought to everything else. She improved the cabin in small ways, adding touches that made it feel more like a home: woven mats on the floor, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, a better organization to the kitchen area. She also proved invaluable in dealing with the horses. She had a way with them that was different from mine but equally effective, a patience and intuitive understanding that made the training process smoother. We worked together in the corral, and I found myself enjoying her company, appreciating the way she anticipated what I needed, the way she could calm a skittish horse with just her voice and steady hands. But it was not all easy. There were moments of friction, times when our different backgrounds and expectations clashed. She sometimes struggled with English, and I knew no Apache beyond a few basic words. Miscommunications led to frustration on both sides. She had customs and beliefs I did not understand, ways of doing things that seemed inefficient to me until she explained the reasoning behind them. I had habits that struck her as wasteful or strange. One evening, about a month after we had arrived at the ranch, we had our first real argument. I had sold 3 horses to a settler passing through, and the money would keep us comfortable for several months. I was pleased with the transaction, but when I told Kaya about it, she looked troubled. "You sell to that man?" she asked. "The one with blue coat?" "Yes." "Why?" "He paid fair price." Her expression darkened. "I see him before. In mountains, before attack. He ride with soldiers who kill my family." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "Are you certain?" "Yes. I remember his face, his voice. He was there." I felt sick. I had just conducted friendly business with a man who had participated in the massacre of Kaya's family. "I didn't know," I said inadequately. "If I had known." "What you do?" she challenged. "Refuse to sell? Try to kill him? This will not bring back my father and brother. This will only bring trouble to us. So I should just ignore it? Pretend it doesn't matter? I not say ignore. I say be smart. We are 2 people alone. He is part of army, has friends, has power. We fight him, we lose. We die. I already lose enough family. I not want to lose you too." The pragmatism in her voice was chilling but undeniable. She was right. Seeking revenge or justice against someone with the backing of the military would be suicidal. But the knowledge that I had shaken hands with a man who had destroyed her life, had smiled and wished him well, sat like poison in my stomach. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I'm sorry you had to see him again. I'm sorry I didn't recognize him for what he was." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "This is world we live in now," she said eventually. "Apache must smile at men who kill Apache. Must trade with them, must pretend past does not exist. If we want to survive, we have no choice. You learn this now too." That night, I held her as she cried silently into my shoulder, the first tears I had seen her shed since the reunion with her mother. I realized then how much strength it took for her to move through each day, to build a new life while carrying the weight of her losses. My admiration for her grew, tempered by anger at a world that demanded such resilience just to survive. As summer deepened into its most brutal phase, we adapted to each other more fully. I learned to read her moods, to understand when she needed space to grieve and when she needed closeness to feel anchored. She learned my patterns, knew when I was frustrated with a difficult horse or when I was pleased with my progress. We developed our own language of gestures and expressions that supplemented our verbal communication. She began teaching me Apache words and phrases, particularly those related to horses and the natural world. I was a poor student, my tongue stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds, but she was patient, correcting me with gentle humor. In return, I helped her improve her English, and I was continually impressed by how quickly she absorbed new vocabulary and grammar. One afternoon, as we worked together to repair a section of fence that had been damaged in a storm, she asked me something that caught me off guard. "You happy, Samuel? With this life? With me?" I paused in my work, considering the question seriously. Was I happy? The words seemed too simple for what I felt. I think so, I said slowly. It's different from what I expected. But yes, I think I'm happy. Are you? She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. Then, I am not unhappy. There is difference, I think. I will never have back what I lost. Part of me will always grieve for my father, my brother, for life I was supposed to have. But this life with you, it is good life. You are good man. You treat me with respect, you share with me, you listen when I speak. This is more than many women have. So yes, I am content. Maybe one day I will be happy again. But content is enough for now. Her honesty touched me. She was not pretending to feel more than she did, was not trying to spare my feelings with false declarations. She was simply being truthful about her experience, and that felt more valuable than any protestations of love or happiness would have been. Content is a good place to start, I agreed. We'll build from there. Summer began its slow fade into autumn, bringing slightly cooler temperatures and the promise of relief from the relentless heat. Kaya's presence had transformed the ranch in ways both tangible and intangible. The cabin was more comfortable, the meals were better, the work felt less burdensome when shared. But more than that, there was a sense of purpose now, a feeling that I was building something that mattered, something that extended beyond my own survival. One evening, as we sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, she told me something that changed everything. "Samuel, I think I am pregnant." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. A child. We were going to have a child. The thought filled me with a complex mixture of joy, terror, and profound responsibility. This was no longer just about the two of us adapting to marriage. This was about creating a new life, about bringing a child into a world that had already proven itself harsh and unforgiving. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. She nodded. "My body tells me. It's too early to be certain, but I know. I feel it." "How do you feel about it?" I asked, needing to understand her reaction before I could fully process my own. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach, her expression contemplative. "Scared," she admitted. "And sad, because my mother should be here for this, should help me when baby comes. But also something good, I think. This baby is future, Samuel. Is new beginning, not just end of old life. Is reason to hope." I reached over and covered her hand with mine, feeling the warmth of her skin, the life that was beginning to grow beneath. "We'll figure it out together," I promised. "And maybe we can get word to your mother, let her know. Maybe she can come when the time gets close." Hope lit up her face. "You would do this? Bring my mother here?" "She's family now," I said simply. "Of course she should be here." Kaya leaned against me then, her head on my shoulder, and we sat together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. The desert stretched out around us, vast and indifferent, but in that moment we were not alone. We had each other, and soon we would have a child. It was a fragile beginning, built on the foundation of tragedy and unexpected connection, but it was ours. The following months brought their own challenges. Kaya's pregnancy was not easy, and there were days when she was too sick to do much beyond rest. I took over more of the domestic work, learning through trial and error how to cook decent meals and maintain the cabin. It was humbling and occasionally frustrating, but it also gave me a new appreciation for what she contributed. I also made good on my promise to contact Nail. Through Tom Bridger's network, I sent word that her daughter was pregnant and that she was welcome to come stay with us for as long as she needed. The response came 3 weeks later. Nail would come when the time was near, and she would bring gifts for the child and medicine knowledge that might help with the birth. As winter approached and Kaya's belly grew round with our child, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. I had set out months ago as a solitary horse trader, content in my isolation, asking nothing from the world but to be left alone to do my work. Then I had found a dying woman in the desert, and that single act of mercy had cascaded into changes I could never have anticipated. I had a wife now. Soon I would have a child. I had responsibilities and connections that bound me to others in ways both challenging and rewarding. My life was no longer simple, no longer entirely my own. But as I watched Kaya move around the cabin, one hand unconsciously resting on her pregnant belly, I realized I would not go back to the way things were even if I could. She had been right, that night by the fire when she first told me she was pregnant. This child was hope, was the future pushing through the cracks in the harsh present. And hope, I was learning, was worth all the complications and fears that came with it. When Nail arrived in early spring, riding in with 2 other women from her band who had agreed to help with the birth, Kaya wept with joy. Mother and daughter embraced for long minutes, and I turned away to give them privacy, busying myself with preparing accommodations for our guests. The birth, when it came 2 weeks later, was long and difficult. I was banished from the cabin, relegated to pacing outside while the women worked within. The sounds that came from inside terrified me, and I found myself praying to a God I was not sure I believed in, bargaining for Kaya's safety and the child's health. Finally, as dawn broke over the desert, a baby's cry split the air. Nail emerged from the cabin, exhausted but smiling. "You have daughter," she told me. "Strong girl. And Kaya is well. Tired, but well." Relief washed over me so intensely that my knees nearly buckled. I went inside to find Kaya propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes shining as she held a tiny bundle wrapped in soft cloth. She looked up at me as I approached, and the smile she gave me was radiant. "Our daughter," she said softly, pulling back the cloth so I could see the baby's face. "She is perfect." I looked down at the impossibly small person in her arms, this child who was mine and Kaya's, this new life that represented the future we were building together. She had a dusting of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air, and when she opened her eyes briefly, they were dark like her mother's. "She's beautiful," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "What should we name her?" Kaya looked at her mother, then back at me. "I want to name her Nail, for my mother. But also give her your people's name. She is both Apache and white. She should have name that shows this." "Sarah," I suggested, thinking of my own mother. "Sarah Nail." Kaya tested the name on her tongue, then nodded. "Yes. Sarah Nail. Is good name. Strong name." We kept our daughter's name as Sarah Nail, and she became the center of our small world. Nail stayed for 6 weeks, teaching Kaya the traditional ways of caring for an infant, sharing knowledge that had been passed down through generations. I watched and learned too, fascinated and terrified by the responsibility of this tiny life that depended on us completely. During those weeks, something shifted in my relationship with Kaya. The partnership we had built took on a new dimension, bound together now not just by our vows but by our shared love for our daughter. I saw her in a new light, marveled at her strength and competence as a mother, felt my respect for her deepen into something warmer and more tender. One night, after Sarah had finally settled into sleep and Nail had retired to her own bedroll, Kaya and I sat together by the fire. She leaned against me, her body relaxed in a way it rarely was, and I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me this. This home, this child, this life. When I thought everything was lost, you gave me reason to hope again. You gave me future." I turned to look at her, seeing in the firelight the face that had become so familiar, so dear. "You gave me the same thing," I told her. "I just didn't know I needed it until you were here." She lifted her face to mine, and we kissed for the first time with something beyond duty or obligation. There was genuine affection in that kiss, perhaps even the beginning of love. It was not the passionate romance of stories, but something steadier, something built on shared experience and mutual respect. It was, I thought, the kind of love that could last, that could weather whatever challenges the harsh land threw at us. When Nail finally left to return to her people, it was with the promise that she would visit again, that the bond between our families would remain strong. Kaya and I stood together, Sarah in Kaya's arms, and watched her mother ride away across the desert. Then we turned back to our cabin, to our life, to the future we were building together one day at a time. The years that followed were not easy. The tensions between settlers and Apache people continued to escalate, making life increasingly difficult for anyone who straddled both worlds. Kaya faced suspicion and hostility when we went to trading posts, and I faced questions and judgment for my choice of wife. But we persevered, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating small victories, and raising our daughter to be strong and proud of both her heritages. We had 2 more children, another daughter and then finally a son. Each birth strengthened the bonds between us, added new threads to the tapestry of our shared life. The ranch grew and prospered, my horse trading business expanding as my reputation for fair dealing spread. Kaya's skills with herbs and medicine became known in the region, and people began to seek her out for healing, which brought additional income and respect. But through all the changes and challenges, I never forgot that it had begun with a simple choice on a blazing summer day. I had stopped to help a dying woman in the desert, not knowing where that choice would lead, not understanding the ripples it would create in my life and hers. That moment of mercy had cascaded into everything that followed, the marriage, the children, the family we built together. Sometimes, in the evening when the work was done and the children were asleep, Kaya and I would sit outside and talk about how we had ended up here. She would remember her fear and desperation that day, how close she had come to giving up. I would remember my hesitation, the brief moment when I almost rode past, dismissing what I saw as a trick of the heat and light. The spirits guided us, she would say, as she always did. And though I still was not sure I believed in such things, I had to admit that some force beyond pure chance seemed to have been at work. How else to explain the precise timing, the unlikely connections, the way everything had fallen into place despite the odds against us? Years later, when Sarah was grown and married herself, when our youngest was learning to break horses under my guidance, when Kaya's hair had begun to show threads of gray and my own back ached more than it used to, I would look at everything we had built and feel a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for Kaya and the children, but for that moment in the desert when I had been given the opportunity to be better than I needed to be, when I had chosen compassion over indifference. That choice had given me everything, a wife, a family, a home filled with life and purpose. It had transformed me from a lonely man drifting through the territories into someone rooted, someone who belonged. And on the nights when Kaya curled against me in our bed, when I could hear our children breathing softly in their corners of the cabin, I knew with absolute certainty that it had been the right choice. The desert had almost taken everything from Nail that day. Instead, it had brought us together, had forged connections that transcended culture and circumstance, had created something beautiful and lasting out of tragedy and chance. That was the strange alchemy of survival in this hard land. Sometimes the worst moments could become doorways to the best things, if you were brave enough to step through them.